Hello. I'm going to talk about the first chapter in our big story. And this is the chapter that begins in the beginning, the very beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth. And it is a story full of wonder, a story where God begins with chaos and out of it brings order, a story from emptiness to fullness. It's the story of our own world, our own creation, and it's a story of who we are. It's a story that contains the basic truth of who we are as human beings. And I grew up in Christian family, Christian schools, and this story of creation lost a lot of its wonder for me when it got turned into a science textbook and people tried to pull out details to try to prove exactly how God created the earth and argue about it. And I think when we turn this account into a science textbook, we lose the sense of wonder because this is not a science textbook. This is story. And it's the truest truth there is about our world and who we are. And we need to keep that focus on what it's saying to us and just on the sense of story and wonder in it. In this story, God, out of nothing, speaks the world into being. And this is a world that is good. God says again and again on each day of creation, it's good, it's good. It's a world in which violence is absent. It is a world created to be beautiful and a world created for peace. It's also a world created for diversity. There's an incredible diversity of life from plants to animals. And it's a world that is created to be responsive. God shares God's power in giving the world a chance to respond. And that's a characteristic of all living things. And then, especially with humanity, God's power is shared with us in that we have the ability, the choice to respond to the world and to respond to God. And so, in telling this story, I just encourage you to focus again and again on the wonder in creation and the wonder that we see every day, and to pull that out. I have this strong memory of when I was in high school and we lived in Kenya and we were on safari, and my father stopped in a in the middle of the savannah, the animals around us, and read us Psalm 104. It's a psalm all about creation and the wonders of creation and what God's done. And, to be completely honest, at the time, it was a little bit awkward. I couldn't help thinking we're the only family sitting here on safari reading the Bible together. But it's an occasion that I remember really, really clearly from those years. And it's an occasion that formed me. And there was a sense of wonder that was a part of that too. And I connect that psalm with creation still and with the wonder of that moment of being on safari. So I guess an encouragement to not be worried about whether things feel awkward or not when you talk about the Bible or read the Bible or bring it into discussion. That, yeah, it will feel awkward, and your kids might think it's awkward, but it will form them, and it will form them in a way that they may remember 30 years later. So, the story of creation also tells us about who we are. God created Adam and Eve in God's own image. And God created Adam and then Adam from the dust of the earth. Adam is a creature from the earth. We are connected to the earth. We are creatures, and Eve was formed from Adam's body, so we are also connected with each other in a really intimate way. As creatures created in God's image, There are a lot of ways people talk about that. People talk about how we're different from animals, how we maybe share the rationality of God. I think we need to be careful about talking about that in a way that doesn't exclude human beings with maybe profound intellectual disabilities. So to think about, what does it mean to be created in God's image? I think one of the implications of that is that every single person is precious, and infinitely valuable and worthy to be treated with respect, um, even if we don't like them, even if they're annoying. I think that's a big implication for our kids. I think being created in God's image, we are also created to be friends with God and to be in relationship with God. And you see that in Adam and Eve walking with God every night in the garden, and talking with Him. And Adam and Eve are created both flesh of the same flesh, but also completely different. Male, female. There's a deep difference and also a deep sameness about them. And that's true of all human beings. That in our differentness, we reflect God, and in our sameness, we do the work God gave us together, and we participate in the life of God together, even as Adam and Eve did. Um, Part of being in God's image too is that God God gives us work to do. He gave Adam and Eve the work of caring for the garden, of filling the earth and subduing it. That word subdue has been really misused. It doesn't mean that Adam and Eve were created to dominate the world. If you think of the way that God leads, especially in Jesus, God leads as servant. God leads through love. And in that same way, Adam and Eve were tasked with caring for the creation, as servant leaders, as stewards of the garden God put them in. And Adam and Eve were also given choice. They were given choice of whether to obey God, and follow God or not. But and that was a freedom that was put into creation. And we too are given this choice, that we can choose to walk with God or not. And like Adam and Eve, we're given the job of caring for all of God's creation, including each other, including the earth, including the animals. I put the verse to read, Ephesians 2:10. It talks about we are God's masterpiece, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God created in advance for us to do. So to talk about, what are you created for? What to with your kids? Like, what are you really good at? What are you passionate about? And how can you bring these things into a life of caring for each other, caring for creation, doing the work that God gave you to do? Finally, in these first two chapters, there is Sabbath. On the last day, on the seventh day, God rested. And that tells us something too about what we're made for. We're given work to do, but it's very clear that it's not up to us to keep creation going. God rested and creation continued, and we're called to rest as well. Creation, keeping the world maintained, keeping creation going is not our job. That's what God does. And we're called to rest and let go. It's not up to us. I included those chapters in Job. They're not about Sabbath, but they do have this strong idea in them that the world runs without our help. As God answers Job's complaint with this incredible description of the world. If you read those chapters, it's about the wildness of the world. It's about the wonder of the world. It's a world that's not entirely safe. And it's a description of a world without humans in it. It's a world that runs without the help of anybody, any human. It runs because God is at the center of it. And so I encourage you, I think, with older kids to look at those chapters, look at the wildness in the world, and also the sense of order there that has nothing to do with human beings doing anything and everything to do with God, who put both wonder and order and wildness into creation. There's a mystery and an order in the world that is far beyond us that we participate in. So all that together, see if you can bring in facets of that as you talk about the world, facets of the wonder, the wildness of who we are, of the innate preciousness at every person, of what it means about how we treat each other, what it means about what we're called to do, what it means about how we live out who God made us to be in the world. And also this idea that it was good. And God created the world and was just incredibly pleased with it, and living in harmony with it. So there are some ideas as you go throughout your week. And next week will come in. I'm afraid the, the creation story doesn't continue very long before we bring in brokenness. But linger in that wonder for a week before we get into the brokenness. Goodbye.